All right, welcome back to the program. As you could see that my guests are already here at the table. Jubril Shittu is the Chief Executive Officer of PPDC, and Adenike Aloba, Program Director, Data Fight, is joining me also. So welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jubril, welcome. PPDC, what does it mean?
Public-Private Development Center.
Yeah, I know.
So we're focused on citizens' engagement.
Yes, I know.
Yes.
I'm just asking for viewers. What's PPDC? So many acronyms. How many person go put for head?
Exactly.
INEC is another acronym.
Right.
If you go out to ask Nigerians what INEC means in full, I'm not sure that many
Yes.
You'll be able to say it.
many will be able to say it. So we're focusing on INEC and the value INEC is bringing to, at least the value it brought to presidential elections and what we're expecting from the governorship elections and how much is being spent. But let me give you a minute each to, ventilate on what your thoughts are, what we've seen. You guys are data people.
Yeah.
So, for Adenike and also for you calibrate, you do studies like this. So, ladies first, Jubril.
Yes.
So let me start from
Okay, so 305 billion naira and the elections that we have seen. For me, the first red flag or the first challenge is that INEC planned for 100 million voters and 24 million voters showed up. And it does beg the question, who is planning, who is doing the data planning for them? Because we know that voter turnout since 1999 has continued to decline up until this election where we had 26% voter turnout. If any business person will tell you that if you invest in a business, your wildest, everything is going to work out right, you can't estimate more than 50% over that number. Just normal business sense. But we had 84 million registered voters in 2019. It moved to 93 million plus in 2022. But the budget went from 189 billion to 305 billion. Admittedly, yes, inflation. And all that has happened. But the real big issue, the underlying issue is, how are you planning for 100 million Nigerians? One of the questions that has come up often and we've had to look at is this: that voter register has not been cleaned in some time, which means even the 93 million that INEC says, oh yeah, we have, it's not really 93 million. People have died. Someone was making a joke that she saw her dead mother's name on the voter register list.
We had our election situation room for a week, and one of our guests here, I think Comrade Maudi, did tell us that her mom, while she was alive, was a voter, consistent voter. Now the mom has passed. Her name is
still there. So we're planning for dead people. We're planning for people who have migrated, who have left the country. And for me, I think the first foundational issue is the elections register, the voters register needs to be cleaned. The original word I used was purged, but let's make it nicer and say it needs to be cleaned. The second thing is that we need to pay a whole lot more attention to INEC's budget and how they're spending it. We need to pay a whole lot more attention to INEC's budget and how they're spending it. If you look at the breakdown of the budget, or of INEC's budget, the percentage that went to elections logistics compared to the percentage that went to the procurement of BVAS, accreditation, materials and everything, is so significant. It's so far apart. 105.25 billion to 23.01 billion. And you're asking yourself, 774 local government, an extra 53,000 plus polling units, and the elections budget for logistics is so low. That budget is just about 7.5% of INEC's budget. And so the point is, and this is where I hope that Nigeria, yes, let's argue INEC did this, INEC did that, but sustainable democracy is a democracy where we are involved from elections to elections. Now we're making noise, the money has been spent. But imagine if we were querying at the point where the budget document was made public. Imagine if we were asking questions, if a bunch of us were saying, look, how can you say 100 million voters? The amount of waste, at least not counting the governorship elections, is over 200 million. Over 200 million. That is waste. Because voter turnout was 24 million compared
okay.
to the 93 that they planned for.
So you've brought a lot of issues, Nike, who would
Pick them
enter a
apart.
granular.
Yes.
Trust me on the program.
Yes.
It's not as if we're not coming for you, but these are the kind of questions we need to ask. Because even as we enter or go into the governorship elections, and let's also query what has been happening. At least we have data all over the years, and you've raised very important questions. Jubril, what's your own view? In a minute, Nick passed 1 minute.
I'll try to keep it to a minute. I think it's important that we contextualize.
Yeah.
For the past 3 elections before this, INEC spent a total of 444 billion naira. But for this election, it was 304 billion, or 305 if you round it up.
Yeah.
But what we see is that Nigerians, the taxpayers' money or the resource revenue is going into paying for the lack of integrity and trust in our electoral process.
Did you hear my intro at the beginning?
No.
When I talked about the value, the money we are spending, is it giving us commensurate value
Yes.
for election integrity?
So if you look at developed countries, you spend an average of $1 to $3.
Yeah.
Transitioning democracies, you spend an average of $6 to $8.
Yeah.
But where you have a post-conflict democracy, then you are spending much higher.
Yeah.
So the question we need to ask ourselves, having come from 1999 until now, what sort of democracy are we practicing? The INEC figures, if you look at it from year to year, for 2019, their budgets per person, if you estimate the dollar figure, was about 6.8 dollars per person, $6.8 per person. And if you look at, for instance, the amount of ballots that were printed, we printed over 427 ballots, but used 0.0%, 0.07% of the ballots printed. Because of
not even up to 10%.
not even up to 10%.
So we printed
427
million ballot papers.
The good thing was that at least we've started printing our ballots.
Yeah.
We had started printing our ballots in country
Nigeria.
from 2019. But the costs, and this reflects also in the logistics, 23 billion for logistics, just like you mentioned. So what we need first is we need to integrate. We have our NIN, we have our beavers, we have what other registration? The road safety license.
Passport.
We have our passport and our
documents.
BVNs.
Yeah.
We need to harmonize so that at least as an individual, we know where your data is coming from, and it needs to be scrubbed daily. We shouldn't be having ongoing registration processes. We should be able to look at, how to ensure that people are able to update, validate.
Yeah.
We have people that have traveled abroad, due to this wave of the brain drain. What are we doing about that? Secondly, we need to look at the elements of the costs. How much, for instance, goes into the setting up of a polling booth? And why are we not, for instance, pooling our resources with other ECOWAS countries to look at, logistics handling hubs for elections?
How do you mean?
So we have our polling booths, and they can be the same. The polling booths that are being used. All you need maybe is to spend on the stickers rather than on, so you have something that you can recycle.
Okay.
So you need to be able to recycle some of the elements. The plastic that is also used for the either presidential, senatorial, and legislative, you can reuse them. Why do we keep buying? Why do we keep spending on this?
But they are plastic buckets.
Exactly. So
some of us have plastic buckets from when our mothers got married.
Yes.
Exactly.
So it's not like it decays or anything.
Yes. And this is just INEC. We've not even started talking about the other areas of the costs of elections. What does it cost for the political party? What does it cost for the candidates themselves? What does it cost us as the citizens? What does it cost for the media, for civil society, for private businesses? So when we are looking at the cost of elections, what does it cost us post-election? And why is it that elections are seen as an investment? Why would I pay 100 million naira to get a form? And I've not, that's just to express my interests, not to even go through the primaries within my party.
Right.
So we need to consider all of these things.
So many questions begging for answers.
Answers, yeah.
Now, where
Yes.
should I start from now? Because there are so many that we need to ask. Perhaps we should look at the area that Jubril talked about, which is why can't we recycle?
Yeah.
For example, why must those those plastic buckets are also being queried, so to speak?
Yeah.
Why should we even be using those kinds of things for
Yeah.
elections? Can you just quickly speak on that? What could be the solutions? Because 4 years ago we had elections, we had the same plastic buckets, so to speak. What happened? Did they destroy them? What exactly happened to them? Because we'll come back to our next budget in a bit so that we'll break
Yeah.
it down. But
Yes. So again, for the elections, we need to be able to interrogate. Elections continue. For instance, we have off-cycle elections, for which at least 16 states are off-cycle states. So within the 4-year period, we usually have elections running. So INEC should be able to tell us how they are able to manage their logistics for the elections. Do you have regional hubs or warehouses where you can keep some of these items and
because I was
products?
coming to that, if we're asking INEC
Yes.
not to recycle,
Yeah.
where do they store?
Where do they store? Yes. Do
I
we?
mean, I
Yes.
imagine that the cost of storage has to be lesser than the cost of,
Of
buying,
buying
over and over,
Over
again.
again.
Yes. Because, okay, let's consider damage. You can damage more than 15 to 20% of some of the non-sensitive electoral materials in a year. Then if you factor in the harmonization of the registration points, then you would have saved us, at least if you budget for 50%, or if we have the true, and that's why we need a census in this country. And we need to be honest
That's
about the
another issue.
census. We need to be
Jubril,
honest
don't
about
bring
it.
us to that. We'll
But
discuss
yes.
census another day.
Yes.
With National Population Commission asking for close to 1 trillion naira to do census. 869
These
billion.
things cost a lot.
Let's not get
Yes.
started on that.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
census is another
Yes.
kettle of fish that will take
Yeah.
like
Yes.
3 days show.
So the pooling of resources, for instance, like I mentioned, you have in this year alone, Sierra Leone is having
Yeah.
elections, Liberia is
Elections,
having
yeah.
elections. So if you're even doing it on a yearly basis, at least in a year, ECOWAS countries have elections. So some of these non-sensitive materials, all it will cost is the cost of moving them from one location to another, and that will be way lesser
Right.
than we spend to procure these items every 4 years.
Right.
Okay. Nike, what's your view? You talked about even cleaning INEC's
Voter register.
voter register. We also talked about, even in my intro, who audits what INEC does? I know they may have in-house accountants and all of that.
Yes.
Who audits them? What came to my mind, for example, like the big fours, the Deloitte, the KPMGs, and all of that. Who audits that after every election? What value, how much value have we brought for this election vis-a-vis the monies that was spent? Because I know now, at least in the next 4 years, INEC and National Assembly will say, give INEC anything they want to do this election.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. Okay, so it's one of the things that I'd mentioned before, the question of citizen participation in election. The reality is the culture of openness, the procurement and contracting and other subject matters like that are gaining a lot more momentum. A lot more people are asking, okay, how did you spend this money, or what did you do with this money? Unfortunately, that system, as it exists right now, is that the money would have gone. The monies would have been spent, which is why we need, and again, this is a charge to civil society and media, because we are the funnel by which people learn about these things. A lot of Nigerians have never seen the Nigeria's budget. A lot of Nigerians, if not for media, civic tech organizations who are saying, oh, this is the budget, this is the breakdown of the budget. A lot of Nigerians have never seen that. So we do have a responsibility as media and civil society to kind of funnel that information so that people can get engaged. Because again, we're a small community. Out of 200 million Nigerians, media, civil society, that stakeholder value chain is a small community. So we need to know for the people to know, so that we begin to interrogate before the monies are spent. Nigeria's audit culture is also
Is
quite
it even before the monies are spent or before the monies are approved,
approved
by
yes.
the National
Approved.
Assembly?
Yes, from
It's-
the point
yes.
of budget approval.
Approval. Can we be at the public hearings and make important
Raise important questions.
questions,
The kind of questions that
or
we're
even
asking,
be
yeah.
part of? I'm thinking, I know that most of those House of Rep members or even senators have legislative aides and
Yeah.
consultants and all
Yeah.
of that. What kind of input are those consultants making to give their senators or House of Rep members or even in whatever the case may be, give them insight so that they ask the right questions? Because sometimes when you see these people too asking questions, you'll be like, is that a senator? What kind of question is that? Or is that a House of Rep member?
So, see, demand begets supply.
Supply, yeah.
So if we begin to demand for it, they are forced to respond to that. See, all the open data initiatives that we have today, open contracting, open procurement, is because demand rose up to say, hey, why can't we see what you're spending our monies on? And thus far, we focused on parastatals, we focused on state agencies, federal government agencies. I think that it's time to begin to focus on institutions like INEC as well, and say, at the point of presenting that budget, how did you arrive at, estimation of 100 million? What data? Okay, so you are budgeting for 100 million. Why are you budgeting simply based on registered voters and not using the voter turnout data that you have? We have voter turnout data at least since 1999 that you can use, and we have seen decline, very obvious decline, very steep decline. Why are you not using that data to estimate? If you say that, for instance, these elections, INEC's publicity media budget was 2.2 billion. So if you say, oh yeah, we're budgeting for 100 million Nigerians, what is your budget for publicity? How are you making sure that those 100 million Nigerians are going to come out to vote? So it's really a question of getting involved from the starting point of the process, so that we can query everything.
I'm seeing that this show will be longer than today, but let's gradually be, just be coasting, because we're bringing out a lot of issues that needs to be interrogated, and I hope that Nigerians are also watching and take cues from what we're saying and begin to ask the right questions. And for INEC to, as electoral body, to provide us answers with this. INEC will say now they are busy with governorship elections, but we are not going anywhere. You all are not going anywhere. So that we are for each other. Now you've raised important issues. For example, what we did, my team and I, we were able to put together, break down the 305 billion from INEC. That's the spending for INEC for these elections. They say, okay, thank you guys. That's it there on the screen. So let's query those numbers a bit from what you've said. For example, INEC, out of the 305 billion, has budgeted 2.24 billion naira for voter education and publicity. What does that mean? I did not get any advert from INEC, for example, say, take this advert. I don't know if I even saw an INEC advert on AIT, or I may be wrong, but how much did INEC spend out of this 2.24 billion for voter education and publicity? What does that really mean?
So I asked that question. I was on a program like this before the elections, an INEC official from Cross River, I think, and I asked the question, what are you? I have held the belief from the start of this electoral process, from PVC registration to collection, that INEC's communication has been poor. They have not done, it's almost like they don't understand how to engage with their audience. You're serving this audience. We need far more communication from you. And then we see a breakdown of a budget that says you had 2.24 billion to do voter education and publicity. Did you hear a jingle on radio once? I've not met one person who heard one 30-second jingle on radio that says, elections is coming, INEC, this is us, this is what we're saying you should do. I haven't. I asked the question about the NOA. Usually when you raise NOA, the question is, NOA is not funded. But here's 2.24 billion. And I asked the question, INEC, what kind of partnership are you doing with NOA? NOA is in 774 local governments. They are everywhere. There is no better way, no better platform to reach Nigerians than engaging at least at that level with NOA. The response was, oh yes, they have an ongoing conversation with NOA. At that time, it was about a month or 2 months to election to see, to do publicity. But What did you do with 2.24 billion?
That's just for voter
Yes,
education
and
yes,
publicity.
yes. I think we need to look at the level of disclosures from INEC and also understand the components of the budget and how they are funded. So, for instance, when budgets are passed, there's the question of where is the source of funding? So, is it coming from our FAC allocation? Is it coming from, some donor support? Is it coming from the private sector, etc., etc.? And until we get those level of disclosures from INEC, we would not be able to interrogate where exactly, the money is coming from or how it has been spent.
Should we even get it from INEC, or can get it from the Ministry of Finance?
It's actually INEC that needs to disclose, because INEC receives receives the money. And I'll give you some interesting data. We had asked INEC in 2022, when we did our annual ranking. We do annual ranking of for FOI, for over 250, freedom of information, for over 250 MDAs. Remember, we have 700 MDAs at the federal level. And when we did that, INEC scored 40 out of the 250 agencies. But INEC's score was 28 over 60. And
for it being 40th position. And that means the ranking was very poor.
For the top 15 to 20 agencies that were ranked, the average ranking was 30. So even INEC scoring 40 just shows you how bad it was. And of the 3 criteria that we used the level of disclosures, we used the proactiveness of disclosures, and we used the quality of information. INEC was scored very poorly, 6 over 30, sorry, on the level of disclosures. 6 over 20 rather, on the level of disclosures. So it shows that there is a whole lot that we need to really know. And it's up to INEC, because Nigerians continue, by virtue of the decline in numbers, continue to lose the trust in the process. And it's something that we need. When we talk about citizens' participation, we need to step up. And INEC has a moral responsibility. And this is what civil society has been saying. INEC never apologized for any of the infractions. But INEC owes us a moral responsibility to explain and provide clarity on some of these things.
Is it just a moral? It seems as if we are saying moral, that means we are begging them.
Yes. Well, it should be
because
a
these are taxpayers' money.
Public officers.
Yes.
It should be a prerogative that you have a responsibility for open disclosure. You have a responsibility to be accountable to the people that you are basically in charge of our stuff. And it's important that we don't lose. What these elections have shown us is voter apathy is on the increase rather than on the decline. In states like Lagos, where it felt as if, they were ready for elections, the difference in voter turnout was about 1.3%.
But isn't it also because that our data is faulty, the information gathering is faulty? Because if our data collection is accurate, voter registration audit has occurred, we may not have up to 93 million registered voters. We will not be saying, INEC says 87 million people have collected PVCs. How do we know they are even right with that 87 million? Who is querying and knowing that it is indeed 87 million? Because INEC may be doing it on its own. Nobody is looking, so they can decide to give us any number. And nobody is asking that question. But we are now asking that question. So if you have reliable data as to voter registration, accredited voters or whatever, then we are able now to justify and say, okay, voter turnout is 24 versus this is a bit fair than the bogus numbers. I hope you all understand what I'm saying.
Voter turnout is a fair representation, which is why they should be using voter turnout rather than registered voters to plan. The voters to plan, because it's actually the ballots counted.
Even if you double it, for instance.
Let's say you even go all in and you double it.
Of 60.
Exactly.
It
still won't get you to that.
Yes. To the question of where else is INEC getting their response, what they said was, the federal government is going to give us money, and then there are development partners who are going to give us money. How much they gave you? Who gave you money? What you use that money for? There's no accountability.
Now, according to INEC's data, INEC's budget breakdown, let's take a look at this angle you've talked about, the international cooperation and cooperation. Yes, I'm seeing 583.65 million naira.
Yeah.
Billion or
Million naira. Do you want to talk about that? Then I'll
First
get
off,
back to.
that's the most innocuous, most least understandable title you can give to an expense. What does international cooperation and cooperation mean? What does it mean? Are you saying you're paying for some kind of cooperation, or what kind of cooperation are you talking? We know by experience that international development partners do come to INEC and say we support you with this, but that's not an expense for your budget. That's not a line that should be part of your budget. That's a credit line. That's something coming into you. So when you say international cooperation, what does that mean? It would make sense if maybe they had ECOWAS support for security. We know that didn't happen, which would have made sense as an expense given the proportion of policemen to Nigerians. So if you had come out to say, for this election, as an ECOWAS country, we have come together, just part of that collaboration, we would say, oh yeah, that expense. But now we have, only INEC can explain what international cooperation means, because and this is the thing. This is what we mean about proactive disclosure, about transparency and accountability. You've got to be able to say things that we don't have to ask you. Everybody knows just the international cooperation. But what does it mean in the context of your budget for elections?
Okay. Jubril, you said something and I don't want it to be lost on us. Then I'll come back to ICT budget, which perhaps BVAS,
Yes.
the almighty BVAS,
Yes.
is under
Yes.
it. But I don't want us to be lost on this thought, which is, you mentioned something earlier when we're talking about data. We have road safety data, we have NIN, we
Yes.
have BVN,
Yes.
we have what else again? We have voters
Passports,
card and all of
Yes.
that. Also last week I asked a very crucial question, which is, we're all we own accounts in banks. I know there are a lot of unbanked people.
Yes.
But where my mind was actually going to is the system that our payment system is adopting. If your ATM expires today, you go into a bank, there's a likelihood you will get that ATM card
Same day.
that
Same
same
day.
day, that
Same
same
day.
time.
Yes.
Mine, they've been sending me message, sorry bank, they've been sending me message for the past 3 weeks. I've not been able to
Go
have
pick
the
it up.
time to
Yeah.
go pick it up.
Yes.
But I know that any day I enter the bank, I will collect
collect.
my ATM. That is one sector that is working with data collection, data management, and I go and I get my ATM card. The question I'm asking, and I don't know for those of you observing and all of that, whether I'm asking a stupid question, is in this same country, that kind of thing is happening. Why can't we adopt the same model for election or to get a voter's card? I don't understand. Or even
yes.
for all the other
Yes.
data.
Yes.
So the basic difference
Collection.
is very simple. One is at an interest and at a benefit, while the other is at no interest and at whose benefit. So you have the bank who is going to definitely make money from maintaining their registration systems and maintaining their data. But for elections, it will definitely be in anybody's interest to be able to budget figures which do not exist. And that's the reality. So if I budget for 100 million people, then it means that reflects on every single line item I'm budgeting for. And I'm justified in budgeting for that, because after all, we've done a voters registration, which indicates that we have 80 million voters. I'll give you one more. We had an increase of 9 million new voters during this entire period. But we did not have any reflection
In the voter turnout.
in the voter turnout.
I mean, I could
It's
have
still
That was
went down.
different
This
from
is
the
the
previous
least
elections.
So far.
So again, if there was that enthusiasm, and we've seen in places like Borno State that it's not security that prevents people from voting. It's not insecurity, rather. People came out to vote. So what exactly are we talking about? A, are the figures faulty? B, are the figures there, but are there other factors that could speak to why people are not voting? Or C, are we maintaining the status quo because of the overall implications of maintaining such figures?
You
Okay.
know, to your question, I think that there's a broader, when we pull out from INEC and its data management challenges, there's a broader question of data management in Nigeria. Nigerians really have no idea how many places their data is in. Like, we are dropping data. You go to hospital, they want everything. You go to the bank, they want everything. There's a broader question of data management and how we're managing data management as a question. And then all those tangential issues of, is there to whose benefit is it that we have so many splintered systems? That BVN is one thing, NIN is one thing, SIM registration is one thing.
Death registration.
Yes,
Yes, they're all data.
I mean, someone was asking,
Yes.
someone raised the question of, oh, do you know how many that, if they can take, the death register to,
Yes,
assess.
exactly. And the death register.
They'll
be able to know how many people are in Nigeria.
That is death and birth registration and local government responsibility.
Yes.
Our local government functioning. So you see, there are many questions that you ask. I mean, I have a kid. I know the register they used to register birth. That thing is huge like this. The paper is started.
Yes.
So they literally open it, one by auntie, we can't find your name. And it's and when that register is full, they take it and dump it in a room where mice and rats have a field day. So look, death and birth registration are local government prerogatives. So if we don't have a functioning local government, it means that by the time INEC is ready to put this register, all of us will go and queue again.
Yes.
All of us will go, come and tell us that you're alive. The same process, PVC, that was so challenging, and collection of PVC was also challenging. When we're asking INEC to review the voter register, essentially, except we're able to voice out like this and have these conversations and say there has to be a better way to do data management. All of us, they are going to require that 200 million Nigerians go and verify that they are alive.
Yes, and again, yes, you don't even necessarily need to go that extreme because we might want to consider the costs.
Yeah.
We can look at currently, the average death rates, the average birth rates, the average number of people that will turn 18 by the next electoral cycle, and use that as clear indicators for your planning.
The challenge
Yes.
with that
How do we
data as
know?
well.
How do we
is
know
You could
people that are
estimate.
turning 18?
You could estimate.
Problem.
Okay, we
The
could
data
even
is there.
estimate from the
You
birth.
could estimate.
The challenge
You
is
could
our
estimate.
estimation of birth. For instance, traditional birth attendants barely factor into that calculation. And how many Nigerians are not giving birth to children within the context
But people
of
still eventually get the
traditional-
certificates.
Not if that's the challenge. Not
That's the
everybody.
challenge.
Yes.
Not everyone.
Yes.
I mean, I know several hospitals where they have NPC guys who say, oh, come and register the birth of your child. But I don't imagine that that's in, I'm trying to remember my mother's village. They don't have that. Which means every birth, and people are living there, giving birth, getting married and dying. Which means every birth, every death. That's why a lot of people say Nigeria's mortality rate is questionable. Because we see the records are just. So it's a broader, so that's the challenge. It's that when we begin to ask these questions, we begin to connect the dots so that eventually the answers will will respond to not just INEC, but will respond to Nigeria's data management question as a whole.
Okay, BVAS. I guess that this is where BVAS falls under. 100 and ICT, 114.26 billion. I said we are going to do this show again because we'll soon end the show. But so many questions to ask. 114.26 billion for ICT cost.
Yeah.
In fact, I think that is the second highest after the electoral operations.
Yes. Yes, it is.
BVAS takes 34% of the entire INEC budget.
Yeah. So the actual figure for Beavers is 105.2 billion.
Yes, out of the 114.
So essentially, that money is essentially mostly Beavers.
Okay, so thank you guys. I think you should just leave that on the screen for a while. Leave that graph for a while on the screen. Where do we start from now? Because Jubril just make some sense out of it.
Yes. So why do we need this in the first place? And I think that's where we could probably start from. If we look at the previous elections, for a very long time, Nigeria has not had credible elections. And I think that was what, President Buhari, with the Electoral Act that was passed, was interested in. He wanted to at least leave a legacy of credible elections. The verdict is out, and I'll just leave it there.
Yes.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the BVAS itself, the use of technology, we need to start asking questions. And again, while acknowledging the realities, for us to improve the integrity of our electoral processes, technology is definitely an enabler of improvements in the system. with the biometric verification, at least we've seen that it's possible to have the valid number of people and not manufactured people, you know, voting during the elections. So it can only get better from there. The second part we've already talked about, which is the data. We need to harmonize all the data sources that we have. So that just like in other countries where you have your social security number, and if you want to get to participate, either if you want to get elected or if you want to vote for someone, you go and register, but with reference to your social security number. So it just makes it easy. But the third part is the procurement. And we are not looking at...
And procurement here, 1.1 billion naira.
Yeah, the entire process, the 103 billion, the logistics, what is the procurement mechanism and standard that INEC has in place? How transparent is it?
Okay. It seems we have more questions.
Yes.
And I'm being tempted that we'll do this again, but we'll talk after.
Yes.
After
but let
the
me
show.
give you let me give you a snippet.
In just 10 seconds, because we've got to
Yes,
close.
let me give you a snippet.
Yeah.
When in 2007, when the World Bank, you know, conducted a study on procurement, you know, fraud in Nigeria, for every 1 naira that was being spent, 60,000 naira.
That's 60 for every 1 naira.
For every 1 naira, 60,000 naira.
Oh, for every 1 naira
that was being spent.
Okay.
60,000 naira was going, you know, into these opaque procurement processes.
Okay.
And that was what led to the progresses that we've seen in
I'll check out
procurement
that
today.
report again.
You need to check. Yes, I'll also share
The
with you.
reality is beavers during the test that INEC did function at about 90 to 95% capacity. But the reality is there was no pressure at that time. Electoral officers did not get to polling booths at 2 p.m. and then had to stay there until 12 a.m. Many things.
We've got to go. We've got to go. So many questions. And it's the same beavers now that INEC is saying it needs to configure before it goes to governorship.
These are the issues.
So we have more questions than answers. The budgets, we're still going to interrogate it further. Thank you very much, Nika, and thank you, Jubril. Jubril Shittu is Jubril Shittu is the Chief Executive Officer of PPDC, while Adenike Aloba is the Program Director, Data Fights. It's not ended yet. We're going to come back here and continue this conversation on the costs of this 2023 elections, taking a look at INEC's budget. That's the much we can take on today's edition of the program. I am Nancy Naji. Be the best you can be the change that you want to see. Oye Dia Room, my namesake Nancy is coming up here for the news. I'll see you all again tomorrow. Bye now.